While the ecumenical councils have attracted the greatest attention, provincial and diocesan councils were regularly convened throughout the Middle Ages and into modern times. Physical evidence of the importance of councils in the history of the Church can be seen in the 52 volumes compiled by Cardinal Manzi in the 18th century. These assemblies not only dealt with issues of doctrine and discipline, but they were also opportunities to hold a bishop to account. Bishops were elected by provincial councils and were sometimes deposed by them. From the 11th century onward, the conciliar mode of church government encountered the growing challenge of papal power. However, the papal monarchy itself faced a serious challenge at the end of the 14th century. After a long residence in the French town of Avignon, the papacy returned to Rome in 1377. When the Pope died, a disputed election took place. One of the claimants remained in Rome, while the other withdrew to Avignon. The Great Western Schism lasted from 1317 to 1418. Many proposals to end the schism were put forward, such as the resignation of both popes or the convocation of a council. Faced with this dilemma, cardinals on both sides summoned the Council of Pisa in 1409, which deposed the Roman and Avignon popes and elected another. However, as the first two still refused to step aside, Europe was now divided in its allegiance to three popes. To resolve this grave crisis of authority, the Emperor Sigismund summoned the Council of Constance in 1414. The council ousted all three popes, and in 1418 elected a new one who was generally accepted, thereby bringing the schism to an end. The council also set the principle of conciliarism against the unbridled authority of the Pope by enacting two decrees. In Haec Sancta, the council declared that the final authority in the Church is a general or ecumenical council representing the whole body of the faithful, and the Pope, like everyone else, is subject to it. By the Decree Frequens, the council hoped to establish the regular convocation of ecumenical councils every 10 years. All of this frightened the papacy, which sought to thwart the conciliar movement in every way. Papal fears of conciliarism delayed until 1545 the convocation of Trent, the Council of Trent, to deal with Protestantism. By then, the division between Protestant and Catholic Europe had solidified to such an extent that reconciliation was impossible. In its concern for the reform of the Church, the Council of Trent declared that in order to ensure fraternal cooperation and correction, bishops were required to summon diocesan synods each year, and archbishops had to convene provincial councils every 3 years. Papal suspicion of councils was so ingrained, however, that 300 years elapsed between the end of the Council of Trent in 1563 and Pius IX's convocation of the First Vatican Council in 1870. Vatican I's proclamation of papal infallibility added new strength to the papal armory. Infallibility had the effect of weakening the conciliar mode of government because it effectively entrusted the final determination of fundamental issues of faith and morals to the Pope, who had no need to convene a council for that purpose. After the election of John Carroll as the first Bishop of Baltimore in 1789, the American Church was in many ways a conciliar church, as two examples will show. First, early in the 19th century, John England, Bishop of Charleston, South Carolina, drew up a constitution for his diocese, providing for an annual convention composed of two houses, one of priests and the other of the elected representatives of the laity. He also argued that councils should be held frequently and that, quote, no affair of general importance to the American Church should be undertaken unless after deliberation in council," end quote. The second example are the 10 provincial councils of Baltimore meeting almost every 3 years from 1829 to 1869, and 3 plenary councils of all the American bishops meeting at Baltimore in 1852, 1866, and 1884. In the 20th century, the American bishops have abandoned plenary councils in favor of a national conference that usually meets twice a year and whose decisions must all be approved by Rome. The Vatican has consistently limited and undermined the authority of national episcopal conferences. The promulgation of papal infallibility and the concomitant notion that councils were no longer as important as they used to be led to an alteration of the Council of Trent's decree that diocesan synods should be held yearly and provincial councils every 3 years. The Code of Canon Law, for example, in 1917, required the convocation of diocesan synods every 10 years and provincial councils every 20 years. Vatican II expressed the hope that synods and councils might flourish with renewed vigor, but it set no time for their convocation. The 1983 Code ruled that provincial councils should be held whenever a majority of the provincial bishops determined that the moment was opportune. Whenever the bishop, on the advice of the priest council, deemed it opportune, he could summon a diocesan council or synod. Following the Second Vatican Council, some bishops convened diocesan synods attended by priests, deacons, nuns, and laymen and laywomen, but the practice has fallen into disuse. In my own diocese of Bridgeport, diocesan synods were held in 1961, 1971, and 1981, but the practice has since been abandoned. The Church cries out today for new structures that will hold bishops accountable to the priests and the people they lead. A return to the earlier conciliar tradition of the Church will give new life and vigor to Christ's body. Diocesan, provincial, national, and ecumenical councils or synods that are fully representative of the whole body of the faithful, bishops, priests, deacons, religious, laymen, and laywomen, and possessing deliberative authority on every issue that affects our spiritual lives, doctrinal, liturgical, disciplinary, administrative, and financial, are essential. Thank you very much.